Back when I was 10, life seemed a whole lot simpler. We lived in a small, rented house on the edge of town, but to Mom and Dad, it was more than that. It was a stepping stone to something bigger, something permanent. They had dreams, you know? Dreams of me going off to college, wearing a white coat or strutting around a courtroom. But me, I had different plans. I remember this one summer evening, we were all sitting out back on our rickety old porch. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across our tiny yard, and Dad was flipping burgers on his ancient grill that looked like it might fall apart any second. "Diana, you gotta start thinking about your future," Dad said, poking at the burgers with a spatula that had seen better days. "Doctor or lawyer, that's where the money's at. Secure." Mom nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Your father's right, honey. We just want you to have a stable career. Something prestigious." I kicked at the dirt with my sneaker, watching it puff up in little clouds. "I want to be an archaeologist," I mumbled, barely loud enough for them to hear. "Dig up ancient stuff, you know?" Dad let out a hearty laugh, the kind that made his belly bounce. "Archaeologist, huh? Why don't you start by digging us a new flower bed out front?" Mom gave him a soft swat on the arm. "David, don't tease her. If she wants to dig, let her dig." "But in her own garden," Dad chuckled, flipping a burger onto a slightly charred bun. "Here, taste tester, tell me if I got the seasoning right this time." He handed me the burger, and I took a big bite, the juices running down my chin. "It's good, Dad," I said after swallowing the mouthful. "That's my girl," he grinned, ruffling my hair. That's how it was back then. Light-hearted jabs and evening chats. It was one of those moments, you know? Where you feel like everything's gonna be alright. "Yeah, maybe I will dig up something big one day. Like dinosaurs or treasure," I said, feeling bolder. "Treasure, huh?" Dad laughed again. "Just don't go digging under the house. The only thing you'll find is old plumbing." We all laughed together, the sound mingling with the chirping of the crickets as the sky turned a deep shade of purple. Those nights on the porch were my favorite. Just us, our little family, talking about everything and nothing at all. Not long after those lazy summer nights, things started to change. It was like one day Mom was her usual self, buzzing around the kitchen, and the next, she was always tired, always sitting down. I didn't get it at first. Parents get sick, right? A cold here, a headache there. But this was different. "Diana, can you grab the laundry for me?" Mom asked one evening. Her voice was weak, and she was pale, paler than I'd ever seen her. "Sure, Mom," I said, hauling the basket up from the basement. It was heavier than I expected, or maybe I just noticed it more because I kept stealing glances at Mom, slouched on the sofa, looking like all her strings had been cut. "Thanks, honey," she whispered as I dropped the basket beside her. "You're becoming quite the helper, you know?" I shrugged, feeling uneasy. "Is everything okay, Mom?" She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a bit under the weather, that's all. Don't you worry." But it was more than that. Much more. Dad knew it too. Their whispers filled the nights, whispers that I wasn't meant to hear, but did. Words like doctors and tests floated through the cracks of my slightly ajar bedroom door. Then, the bombshell dropped. "I've got cancer, Diana," Mom said one gray morning, her words stark against the clatter of breakfast dishes. Dad stood behind her, a hand on her shoulder, his eyes dark pits of worry. What does that mean?" I asked, not really wanting to hear the answer. "It means I'm very sick," she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "But the doctors are going to help me." Dad chimed in, his voice gruff. "We're gonna fight this, right? All of us together." But it wasn't a fight we could win. Not this time. Mom got weaker, the life slowly draining out of her as if she was a balloon with a tiny hole, and all the air was slipping out. The hospital visits became more frequent. I hated those places. They smelled like disinfectant and despair. Mom was often too tired to talk after the treatments, and I'd sit by her bed, holding her hand, trying not to cry. "Don't you worry, Diana," she'd say on her better days, a shadow of her usual spark in her eyes. "You're strong. You'll be okay." "I don't want to be strong," I'd whisper back. "I just want you to be okay." But she wasn't. And then one day, she just wasn't there anymore. After Mom passed, Dad didn't take long to start changing too. It was like he couldn't deal with the quiet of the house, the empty spaces Mom used to fill. That's when Carol came into the picture. "Diana, this is Carol," Dad introduced her one evening, a few months after Mom's funeral. Carol was all bright lipstick and too loud laughter. "Hi, Diana," Carol cooed, bending down to my level, which just annoyed me. "I've heard so much about you." Dad was watching, expecting me to say something. "Nice to meet you," I mumbled, but it wasn't really. Nothing about it was nice. Carol moved in not long after that. Her stuff invaded our house like weeds, spreading and taking over spaces that used to be filled with Mom's things. I hated it. I hated how Dad laughed with her, how he seemed to forget the shadows that had clung to him. Life with Carol kicked off with small annoyances, the kind you might brush off at first, but soon enough, they pile up, weighing you down. I noticed her subtle digs right after the wedding. It was like a switch had flipped. One morning, as I was getting ready for school, I couldn't find my favorite blue sweater. I rummaged through my drawers, throwing clothes left and right. Frustrated, I stormed into the kitchen where Carol was sipping her coffee, looking too pleased with herself. "Have you seen my sweater? The blue one?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Carol looked up, her eyes narrow. "Oh, that old thing? I might have tossed it. It was getting too shabby, don't you think?" I stared at her, my fists clenching at my sides. "It was my favorite. Mom gave it to me." She shrugged, turning back to her magazine. "You need to grow up, Diana. Stop clinging to rags." That was Carol. She'd throw away bits of my life as if they were crumbs on a table, and I was supposed to just clean up and move on. During meals, I began to notice that my food tasted weird. My soup was always too salty, and my vegetables soggy. One evening, I finally spit it out, right there at the dinner table. "Dad, this tastes awful," I exclaimed, pushing my plate away. Carol's eyes flashed with something dark, but Dad was oblivious. He glanced from me to Carol, then back to me. "Now, Diana, Carol's been on her feet cooking all day. Apologize, that's rude." I looked down at my plate, biting my tongue to stop the tears. "Sorry," I muttered, not really sorry at all. Then there were my clothes. Carol took me shopping one weekend, and every single item she chose was a disaster. Everything was too big, the colors drab. "These will last longer as you grow," she said, pushing a pile of oversized shirts and pants into my arms at the checkout. I tried on one of the outfits for the first day back at school. I looked ridiculous, sleeves hanging past my hands, pants baggy and tripping me up. The kids at school didn't let it slide. "Hey, Scarecrow, Halloween's over," they'd jeer as I walked by, my cheeks burning with shame. I came home that day, threw the clothes on the floor, and yelled, "I can't wear this stuff to school anymore." Carol, always lurking around like she had nothing better to do, called back from the living room. "You'll wear what we buy, and that's that. You should be grateful." One night, I tried again to talk to Dad. I caught him in the garage, tinkering with some old radio he'd found at a yard sale. "Dad, can we talk?" I ventured, watching his hands move over the wires. He didn't look up. "Sure, kiddo, what's up?" "It's Carol. She's not nice to me when you're not around." There, I'd said it. My heart was racing, waiting for him to see the truth. Dad stopped what he was doing, finally looking up, but the expression on his face wasn't what I hoped for. His brows furrowed, and his voice was stern. "Diana, Carol's trying her best. You need to give her a chance, stop making things up." "Making things up?" My own father didn't believe me. But, Dad. No buts. I don't want to hear this nonsense again. He turned back to his radio, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. I walked out of the garage, my vision blurry with tears. It was clear then. Dad was in Carol's corner, no matter what. I was on my own. School used to be my escape, a place where I could forget home troubles, at least for a few hours. But with Carol's influence creeping into every aspect of my life, even school became a battleground. Sometimes, after particularly rough mornings, I'd hide in the library during lunch. Books don't laugh at you or call you names. But one day, Mrs. Pearson, the librarian, caught on that something was off. "You're here a lot lately, Diana. Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes kind but worried. I shrugged, my standard response these days. "Just like the quiet," I mumbled, not meeting her eyes. "Quiet's good, helps you think. But friends are good too," she replied, leaving me with a gentle smile and a feeling that maybe someone actually saw me. Then there was Grandma June. Visiting her was like breathing fresh air after being stuck in a stuffy room. She'd always greet me with a big hug and the smell of something delicious baking. As we sat at her kitchen table, eating warm apple pie, I'd open up about everything: school, the kids, not fitting in. Everything but the full truth of Carol's nastiness. That, I kept buried. Didn't want to worry her. "Kids can be tough," Grandma would say, slicing another piece of pie. "But remember, it's not about fitting in. It's about standing tall, being yourself." Sometimes, I'd help her in the garden, pulling weeds or watering plants. It was during one of these afternoons, hands in the dirt, that I finally hinted at how tough things were with Carol. "Grandma, what do you do when someone just doesn't like you, no matter what?" I asked, dumping a trowel full of weeds into the bin. "Oh, honey," she sighed, wiping her brow. "Some folks, you just can't win over. But remember, it says more about them than it does about you. Hold your head high, do what's right, and let their problems be their own." Her words were a balm, soothing the raw edges of my daily battles. Grandma's place became my sanctuary, the one spot where I could shed the weight of being the odd one out, the misfit in ill-fitting clothes. If life was a game, it felt like I was losing, badly. But then, things took a turn, like they often do when you least expect it. Carol got pregnant. You'd think that would smooth things over, but nah, it just cranked up the tension. I remember the day she told us. Dad and I were in the living room, half watching some show when Carol strutted in, beaming like she'd won the lottery. "I've got news," she announced, her voice ringing a bit too cheerful. Dad muted the TV, turning to her with a raised eyebrow. "What's up?" "We're having a baby," she gushed, her hands on her belly as if she was already showing. Dad, well, he looked like someone had smacked him upside the head, but then he started smiling, really smiling. That's great, honey." He got up and hugged her, and I just sat there, trying to figure out how I felt about it. The pregnancy changed Carol's mood swings into something epic. One minute she'd be sweet as pie, the next she'd snap over the smallest things. And somehow, her bad moods were often my fault. Then the miscarriage happened. It was a shock, even to me. Carol was devastated, and I actually felt sorry for her, for both of them, until she twisted it into something ugly. "It's stressful, living with her," I overheard her tell Dad one night. "Stress is bad for the pregnancy." It was too much. Her words stung like a slap. I was just existing, trying to stay out of her way, and now I was being blamed for this? Dad didn't argue with her, didn't defend me. That night, I lay in bed, realizing fully and painfully that I was alone in that house. Dad's silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The next few weeks were rough. Carol walked around like a wounded queen, and Dad tiptoed around her. I tried to make myself invisible, but Carol would find ways to jab at me. "See what you've caused," she hissed one day as I passed by the living room, where she was curled up on the couch. "You're just a problem child." I stopped, turned to her. "I didn't do anything to you." "Don't talk back to me," she snapped. just go to your room." I went, not because she told me to, but because I couldn't stand to look at her, to hear the lies twisting around me like chains. Things got worse after Carol found out she couldn't have any more kids. The doctors were clear, and so was Dad's response when he tried to console her. "We've got Diana, no need to fuss," he said, as if I could be a stand-in for the child they lost. That only made Carol meaner. She started getting more physical, pinching me when no one was looking, leaving marks where clothes would cover. Every pinch was a message, a reminder that I was the reason for her unhappiness. One day at school, during gym, I changed into shorts and a tee. That's when Lisa, a girl I sometimes studied with, noticed the bruises. "Diana, what happened to your arms?" she gasped, her eyes wide. I pulled down my sleeves quickly, my heart racing. I fell down the stairs at home," I lied, avoiding her gaze. Lisa looked worried but didn't push it. I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Later that day, Mrs. Jenkins, my English teacher, pulled me aside. "Diana, I've heard from a few students, they're worried about you. They've seen bruises." Her voice was soft but firm. "What's happening at home?" I felt trapped, the lie heavy on my tongue. "I'm just clumsy, I guess." That afternoon, Dad was called into school. I waited at home, anxiety gnawing at my insides. When he finally stormed in, his face was thunderous. "Diana, what have you been telling your teachers?" he barked as soon as he walked through the door. "Nothing, Dad, Don't lie to me. Mrs. Jenkins called me at work, said there's talk about bruises and whatnot. You're making us look bad. You're making Carol look bad." "I'm not making anything up." The truth burst from me in desperation. "She's hurting me, Dad. Carol is hurting me when you're not around." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're being dramatic. Carol wouldn't hurt a fly. You're just trying to cause trouble, aren't you? Go to your room. You're grounded. No dinner." He grabbed my arm, not caring about the bruises, and dragged me to my room, locking the door behind him. I heard Carol's voice then, her words slithering under the door. "See? No one believes a little liar. You just made your life a real nightmare, Diana." I felt so alone, so cornered, there was nothing left to do but the one thing I had avoided. I called Grandma June. "Grandma, can I come live with you? Please, I can't stay here anymore," I sobbed into the phone after telling her everything. There was a pause, a heavy silence, then, "Of course, darling. I'll be there as soon as I can." She must have driven like the wind, because it wasn't long before she was at the door. Dad tried to stop her at first, saying he could handle his own family. But Grandma was fierce. "If you don't let her go, I'll take this to the police. I'll sue you and your wife for everything you've done to her," she threatened, her voice steely. Dad looked between Carol and me, his face a mix of anger and defeat. Finally, he stepped aside. "Fine. Take her then." Carol's only response was a satisfied smirk, as if she'd won some twisted game. At Grandma's, my room was waiting, a sanctuary painted in soft blues and filled with sunlight. "You're going to be okay, Diana," Grandma said, standing in the doorway with a smile that reached her eyes. I believed her. For the first time in a long time, I believed that things could be okay. That night, I slept without fear, without dreading what the next day might bring. I was free, and I was home. Living with Grandma June was like being reborn into a world where I could actually breathe. We fixed up the house together, baked cookies, and laughed a lot. She let me invite friends over, something Carol never did, and suddenly, I had a normal life. We traveled too. Grandma loved hitting the road, said it was good for the soul. She even bought me a professional camera to capture everything we saw. Photography quickly became more than a hobby. It was my way of seeing the world, capturing moments that felt too big for words. Years slipped by, happy and full, a stark contrast to the life I'd left behind. Dad never called, never sent birthday wishes. It was as if I'd vanished from his life, which was fine by me. I had Grandma, and that was enough. But then, Grandma got sick, her heart giving out after a lifetime of giving everything to everyone else. When she passed, it felt like losing my anchor. I organized the funeral with her close friend, Mrs. Avery, who knew just how much Grandma had meant to me. The funeral was a blur of faces and condolences, a soft murmur of sadness that matched the gray sky overhead. But then, Dad and Carol showed up, their faces strangely bright, almost eager. It sickened me. As people started leaving, Dad and Carol lingered, and we ended up at Grandma's house. That's when Carol, ever the viper, told me to pack up my things. "This house now belongs to your father," she sneered, eyeing the place like it was a cash register ready to pop open. Dad was inspecting the walls, the cabinets, nodding along like he was already planning renovations. "Yeah, Diana, pack your things and get out of here." I couldn't help but laugh. They both frowned. "What's so funny?" Dad asked, his tone sharp. "Grandma knew you might pull something like this," I said, pulling out the will from my bag. "She left everything to me, the house, the money, everything. It's all in my name." The color drained from their faces. It was the most satisfying thing I'd seen in years. Dad recovered first, a greedy glint in his eye. "Well, then, as your father, I'll just have to manage that inheritance for you." Carol was nodding, almost drooling with anticipation. "Think of what I could do with that money. A new car, some work done to keep me looking young." I cut them off with another laugh, louder this time. "Manage my inheritance? Dad, you're so out of the loop you didn't even realize I turned 18 last month. I'm my own guardian now. Legally, I control everything." Their jaws dropped. It was comic, really. They tried to argue, to beg, but I was done. I'd had years of their neglect and cruelty, years to build up the strength Grandma had nurtured in me. "Out. Now," I said, my voice firm, echoing through the empty halls of a house that had never felt more like a fortress. They left, Carol spitting insults over her shoulder, Dad's shoulders slumped in defeat. The door slammed shut, and the sound was like the closing of a long, painful chapter of my life. 10 years had woven themselves into the fabric of my life seamlessly. I was 28 now, living the kind of life Grandma June would have been proud of. I worked as a lawyer at one of the city's most prestigious firms, a dream my mother had harbored for me. My days were filled with briefs, courtrooms, and justice. My life was full, fulfilling, and most importantly, it was mine. One evening, as I was wrapping up a particularly challenging case file, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and hesitating only for a moment, I answered. "Diana." The voice was unmistakably Dad's, strained and rough as if each word was a struggle. "I need your help." The voice from my past, not heard for a decade, dropped like a stone in my stomach. "Look, we're in a bit of a situation here. Carol and we've hit a rough patch financially. We need some help, some money to get out of debt. It's urgent." I paused, taking a moment to process the nerve, the audacity. Memories, dark and dusty, filtered back through the recesses of my mind. "You must be joking," I said finally, my voice cold and even. "After everything, you call me for money?" In the background, I could hear Carol's voice, shrill and panicky. "Tell her she owes us, after everything we've done for her." I couldn't help but laugh, short and humorless. "Oh, you? For what, exactly? For throwing me out? For siding with Carol over your own daughter?" There was a pause on the line, a crackle of tension. Then Carol was back, her voice cutting through. "You'll regret this. We'll take you to court. We'll get our alimony." That only made me laugh again, harder this time. "Carol, I'm a lawyer. Remember? You have no grounds for alimony, and frankly, you have no idea who you're dealing with. You renounced any claim to me when Grandma became my guardian. Legally, you're nothing to me." Dad tried again, desperation seeping through. "Diana, please." But I was done. "No. You made your choice years ago. Live with it. Goodbye, Dad." I hung up, my heart pounding, but my decision was clear. I blocked the number immediately, leaning back in my chair, letting out a long, slow breath. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. As I turned back to my desk, my eyes caught the framed photo of Grandma and me, taken on one of our many trips, a reminder of where I came from and the strength I carried. I smiled, a real,